A powerful CEO arrives home early to find his 6-year-old daughter being used as human transport by her stepmother, forced to carry twin babies tied to a bamboo pole across their mansion's grounds. What starts as shocking cruelty unravels into a sinister plot involving inheritance, dark secrets, and a conspiracy that threatens everything. Will he uncover the truth before it's too late? Before this story begins, subscribe to the channel and type Amen in the comments. A beautiful piece of good news may come your way very soon. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. The October sun cast long shadows across the Westchester estate as Victoria Ashford surveyed her domain from the marble terrace. At 32, she embodied calculated elegance. Honey blonde hair, designer wardrobe, the perfect image of wealthy refinement. Inside, twin 18-month-olds played in their nursery. Madison and Mackenzie represented Victoria's biological claim to the Ashford fortune, her golden tickets to everything she'd schemed for. But there was a problem, a 6-year-old problem with auburn curls and green eyes. Charlotte Ashford sat in her third-floor room, once bright and cheerful but now feeling like elegant confinement. Cream walls had replaced the yellow her mother chose. Expensive furniture stood impersonal and cold. The only real color came from a worn stuffed rabbit under her pillow, a remnant from before Victoria. Charlotte practiced cursive letters at her antique desk, her small hand cramping. A proper Ashford must have impeccable penmanship, Victoria always said. The child rarely cried anymore, rarely complained. Silence was safer than speaking. 3 floors below, Maria Gonzalez folded laundry with the efficiency of 15 years serving the Ashford family. At 58, she'd witnessed everything. James's first marriage to sweet Caroline, Caroline's sudden death from an aneurysm 3 years ago, James's remarriage to Victoria 6 months later, and Charlotte's transformation from happy child to silent shadow. Maria's hand stilled on a tiny pink dress. She'd seen things that turned her stomach. Victoria's honey voice with James present, her ice when he left, the impossible standards for Charlotte while the twins were indulged. But Maria had daughters in school, and jobs like this were rare. She folded laundry and kept silent, guilt gnawing constantly. The estate gates opened at 5:47 p.m., earlier than expected. James Ashford's Mercedes glided up the driveway, his conference call mercifully canceled. At 45, he carried the weight of running a multinational tech company with focused intensity that built fortunes but missed details. Distinguished silver threaded his dark hair. His tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. He'd been traveling 3 weeks: Singapore, Tokyo, London. Victoria had encouraged it with characteristic support. "You're building an empire, darling. Charlotte will be fine." He'd believed her because it was easier than questioning, because grief over Caroline still clouded everything. James parked and entered through the front door, loosening his tie. The house rose like a monument to success. Georgian architecture, white columns, glowing windows. He'd bought it when Charlotte was born, imagining family dinners and birthday parties. Caroline had loved it immediately. Victoria had appreciated it strategically. The house was unusually quiet. No nursery sounds, no television. Nothing. "Victoria?" he called. No response. James moved through rooms. Pristine kitchen, empty dining room, dim library. He checked the nursery, finding Madison and Mackenzie sleeping peacefully. Where was everyone? Moving toward the rear, toward the solarium leading to gardens, movement caught his eye through glass doors. He stopped, stepped closer, and felt the world tilt. In the manicured space between house and guest cottage, Charlotte stood with a bamboo pole balanced across her narrow shoulders. At each end, suspended in pink fabric slings, hung his infant daughters. Madison on the left, Mackenzie on the right, their combined 55 pounds distributed across Charlotte's 6-year-old frame like medieval punishment. Victoria stood nearby in a striking red dress, phone in hand, laughing as she filmed. Her voice carried through glass, bright and mocking. "Walk faster, Charlotte. Your sisters need exercise." "What kind of big sister are you?" Charlotte's face was red with exertion, streaked with tears she desperately tried hiding. Her legs trembled with each step across grass, breath coming in labored gasps. The bamboo bowed with weight, pressing into her shoulders through her thin shirt. The twins, oblivious, laughed and waved their hands, thinking it was a game. "Please," Charlotte whispered, "please, I can't." "Can't." Victoria's voice sharpened. "Ashfords don't say can't, Charlotte. Again, walk to the oak tree and back." Charlotte stumbled, nearly dropping to her knees, catching herself at the last moment. The pole wavered dangerously, twins swaying in their slings. Then Charlotte straightened with visible effort, her small body shaking as she took another step. James stood frozen, his brain struggling to process what his eyes showed. Then fury exploded through his chest. His hand hit the door handle so hard the glass rattled. He burst onto the terrace with a roar that scattered birds. "What the hell is going on here?" Victoria spun, her face cycling through surprise, calculation, then carefully constructed concern. Charlotte's knees buckled at her father's voice. She dropped to grass, bamboo falling away as James sprinted across the lawn. He reached his daughters first, checking them with trembling hands. They were fine, giggling, reaching for him. He carried them toward Maria, who appeared in the service entrance doorway, face pale with shock. "Take them inside," James commanded, voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Now." Maria hurried forward, gathering twins and disappearing into the house. James turned back to Charlotte, still kneeling on grass, small body heaving with exhausted sobs she could no longer contain. He dropped beside her, heart shattering at angry red marks the bamboo left across her shoulders, visible through her shirt. "Charlotte," he breathed, reaching carefully. "Sweet girl, are you hurt?" She flinched away instinctively. That reaction hurt worse than anything. When had his daughter started fearing touch? "I'm sorry, Daddy," Charlotte whispered, green eyes, Caroline's eyes wide with terror. "I tried to be strong. I tried not to say can't. I'm sorry I wasn't good enough." "No." The word came fierce, definitive. James pulled her into his arms despite initial resistance, holding her with gentleness, contradicting his fury. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. Understand?" Charlotte buried her face in his shoulder and wept. Deep, wrenching sobs speaking of months of accumulated pain finally finding release. James held her and stood, lifting her easily despite her protests. His daughter weighed nothing. She'd always been small, but this was different. She felt insubstantial, as if fading while he wasn't looking. Only then did he turn attention to Victoria, standing 15 feet away with phone still in hand, wounded innocence perfectly arranged on her beautiful face. "James, thank God you're home," she began, voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I was teaching Charlotte responsibility. She offered to help with twins, but it was too much. I was about to stop when you—" "Stop." The single word cut like a blade. James took 3 steps toward her, something in his face making Victoria's rehearsed expression falter. "I saw everything," he said quietly, dangerously. "From the beginning. Every word, every laugh, every moment you tortured my daughter." Victoria's eyes widened, genuine surprise quickly masked. Her mind worked visibly, recalibrating, searching for the angle that would work. She opened her mouth, but James cut her off. "Go inside, pack a bag, 1 hour, then I want you out of this house." "James, you can't be serious." "I have never been more serious. 1 hour. If you're still here after that, I'm calling police and showing them security footage from every camera on this property. They'll be very interested in what I found today." Real fear flickered across Victoria's face. Security footage. Of course there were cameras. James's company specialized in security systems. Why hadn't she considered that? "The twins," she tried, playing her last card. "Will be fine. Better than fine. Maria has more mothering instinct than you've shown in 3 years." James adjusted Charlotte in his arms, feeling her heartbeat gradually slowing. "We'll discuss custody through lawyers. Right now, this minute, I want you gone." Victoria's face hardened, mask finally slipping to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. "You'll regret this. I know things about you, James. Corporate things, personal things, things that could be very problematic." "Is that a threat?" "Reality check." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You fire me from this marriage without proper compensation, I'll burn your reputation. Every business magazine, every social platform, every outlet. I'll tell them how you neglected your daughter, ignored your wife, cared more about money than family. I'll take half of everything and I'll make sure Charlotte suffers for it. James felt Charlotte tense at mention of her name. Something inside him, something carefully controlled his entire adult life, finally snapped. "Maria," he called, eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Call Robert Jenkins. Tell him I need him here immediately with emergency custody paperwork." Maria appeared in the doorway, phone already in hand. "Yes, Mr. Ashford." James looked down at Victoria with an expression that made her step backward. "You want to threaten me? Fine. But understand, I built a billion-dollar company from nothing. I have legal resources you can't imagine. And I will spend every cent, every favor, every bit of influence to make sure you never get within 100 feet of these children again." He turned away, dismissing her as if she'd ceased to exist, and carried Charlotte toward the house. Over his shoulder, he added one final statement. 59 minutes, Victoria. Use them wisely." As he crossed the threshold, Charlotte whispered against his neck, words so quiet he almost missed them. "I thought you didn't love me anymore, Daddy." James stopped walking. The world seemed to stop with him. Those 9 words contained such casual devastation, such matter-of-fact acceptance of abandonment, that he physically couldn't move for several seconds. When he finally found his voice, it came out broken. "Never. I will never stop loving you. Never. And I'm so sorry. God, Charlotte, I'm so sorry I let you think that even for a moment." He carried her upstairs to his bedroom. The master suite Victoria had redecorated in blacks, whites, and grays, erasing every warm color Caroline chose. He laid Charlotte gently on the bed and sat beside her, hands shaking as he carefully lifted her shirt to examine shoulder marks. The bamboo left angry red welts, but older marks made his vision blur. Faded bruises on her upper arms, finger-shaped marks from rough handling. How had he missed this? How had he been so blind? "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long has she been hurting you?" Charlotte wouldn't meet his eyes. "I don't want to get anyone in trouble." "You won't. I promise. But I need to know the truth, sweetheart. All of it." The story came slowly, haltingly, fragments James had to piece together like a horrible puzzle. The training starting 8 months ago. Victoria's insistence that Charlotte needed to be useful, needed to earn her place, needed to understand twins were the future of the Ashford name. Punishments disguised as lessons, impossible standards, constant criticism, deliberate isolation from anyone who might notice. She said. Charlotte's voice dropped to barely a whisper. She said you didn't need me anymore, that you had better daughters now, that I should be grateful she let me stay at all. Each word was a knife to James's heart. He pulled Charlotte close, resting his chin on her auburn curls, making a vow he'd keep forever. Never again would he prioritize business over his daughter. Never again assume everything was fine because it looked fine. Never again trust someone just because they wore a pleasant mask. Below, through windows, James could see Victoria's red dress as she stormed toward the guest cottage. 55 minutes left. He needed to call Robert, secure legal protection, document everything. But first, Charlotte needed to understand something essential. "Listen to me," he said, pulling back to look into her eyes. "You are not here because anyone lets you stay. You're here because this is your home, because you're my daughter, because I love you more than anything. The twins are your sisters, and I love them too, but you..." His voice caught. "You were here first. You're Caroline's gift to me. You're the best part of me. And I will never, ever let anyone make you feel less than that again. Never. Understand?" Charlotte nodded, but James could see she didn't quite believe it yet. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. He had that time now. He would make that time. A knock at the door made them both turn. Maria stood in the doorway, weathered face creased with concern and something else, relief that someone had finally seen. "Mr. Ashford, Mr. Jenkins is on the phone. He can be here in 40 minutes with preliminary paperwork." She hesitated, then added softly, "I also wanted you to know. I kept notes. Dates, times, things I witnessed. I have videos on my phone, too. I was going to tell you when you got back, but... She trailed off, looking ashamed. Thank you, Maria, James said, meaning it. Will you stay with Charlotte for a few minutes? I need to make calls. Of course. Maria entered and sat on the opposite side of the bed. Charlotte leaned against her with ease, speaking of long-established trust, and James felt fresh gratitude toward this woman who'd cared for his daughter when he failed to. He stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, he heard it. Victoria's voice raised in argument coming from below, and another voice responding. Male. Unfamiliar. James moved quickly to the landing where he could see down into the front foyer. Victoria stood near the door, suitcase at her feet, talking urgently to a man James had never seen. Tall, perhaps 40, with casual confidence that set off warning bells. Leather jacket, expensive jeans leaning against the doorframe as if he owned the place. Told you to wait, Victoria was saying, voice tight with frustration. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. He came back early. Maybe time to accelerate the timeline, the man replied, tone lazy but body language alert. You've been dragging this out. Just tell him about the documents, about what you found, and let's be done. It's not that simple if he... Victoria stopped abruptly, eyes flicking upward as if sensing she was watched. James stepped fully into view at the top of stairs, expression neutral despite ice forming in his veins. Victoria, I believe I told you to leave. 37 minutes, unless you'd prefer I call police right now? The man straightened, eyes assessing James with professional calculation. Mr. Ashford, I've heard so much about you. I can't say the same. Who are you and why are you in my home? Victoria's hand moved to the man's arm, a gesture far too familiar to be casual. This is Derek Shaw, my attorney. Your attorney. James descended 3 steps slowly. Your attorney who arrives within an hour, already briefed, and suggests accelerating timelines for something involving documents? How efficient. Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Ashford called as soon as she understood the situation. I happened to be nearby. And yes, there are documents we'll need to discuss. Documents regarding Charlotte's legal status. Documents regarding financial irregularities in your offshore accounts. Documents regarding the true nature of your late wife's death. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. James gripped the banister, knuckles white. What did you just say? Oh, come on, James. Victoria's voice shifted to something harder, sharper, showing her true self now that pretense was pointless. Did you really think I married you for love? I married you for money. And when I found certain information about how Caroline really died, about what you knew and when you knew it, I realized I had something even more valuable. I had leverage. James felt the world tilt differently this time. Caroline's death. The aneurysm doctors said could have been caused by stress, genetics, terrible luck. He'd spent 3 years drowning in guilt. If he'd noticed her headache sooner, insisted on more tests, been home more often. But there had been nothing suspicious. The autopsy was thorough, wasn't it? I don't know what fantasy you've constructed, he said carefully. But my wife died of natural causes. The medical examiner confirmed it. Did he? Derek pulled a folder from inside his jacket, holding it up but not offering it. Or did he confirm what the preliminary toxicology report showed? The report filed before a generous donation to his retirement fund resulted in a revised report? The report showing traces of compounds triggering exactly the kind of brain hemorrhage your wife experienced? James's vision tunneled. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Caroline's death had nearly destroyed him. The idea that someone could have. You're lying, he said flatly. This is extortion. You're making up evidence to... Am I? Victoria's smile was cold and triumphant. Then explain why you paid $50,000 to Dr. Andrew Morrison 3 weeks before Caroline died. Explain why that money was routed through your company's discretionary fund. Explain why Morrison prescribed Caroline new migraine medication causing severe reactions when combined with certain substances found in her system. James felt like he was falling even though his feet remained firmly on stairs. He had paid Morrison, for a legitimate consulting contract regarding medical technology startup investment. But the timing, the amount, Morrison being Caroline's physician. From outside, it could look like something else, something damning. "This is insane," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he could see the trap they'd constructed, the way facts could be twisted, the way innocent actions could be reframed, the way a grieving widower could be painted as a calculating murderer. Victoria must have seen recognition in his face because her smile widened. "Now you understand. So here's what's happening. You're giving me everything I want. Full custody of twins, $20 million immediate settlement, another $50 million in trust funds, and this house. In exchange, these documents stay private. You keep your reputation, your company, and your freedom. And if I refuse, then I go to media with everything. To police. To your board. And while you're fighting charges of murdering your first wife, I'll petition for emergency custody of all 3 children, including Charlotte, on grounds that you're a danger to minors. After all, if you killed her mother." She let the implication hang, poisonous and devastating. James stood frozen, mind racing through scenarios. If Victoria went public with these fabricated accusations, even if eventually cleared, the damage would be irreparable. His company would suffer. Investors would flee. His name would be permanently associated with suspicion. And Charlotte. God, Charlotte would be subjected to interrogations, media scrutiny, potential foster care. She'd already been through so much. But if he gave Victoria what she wanted, she'd have resources and custody rights to continue tormenting his daughters forever. The twins would be raised by this woman. Charlotte would lose her sisters. And Victoria would always have this leverage, always able to demand more, always holding this manufactured evidence over his head. Trapped. He was completely trapped. Or was he? In the silence following Victoria's ultimatum, James became aware of movement behind him. He turned slightly to see Charlotte standing in the hallway, clearly visible and clearly listening. Her small face was pale, eyes wide, but there was something in her expression. Not fear exactly. More like recognition, understanding. Charlotte took 3 steps forward and spoke clearly, her 6-year-old voice carrying down through the multi-story foyer with unexpected strength. "She's lying about Mommy." Everyone froze. Victoria's face went white with shock. Derek's professional composure cracked. James turned fully toward his daughter, heart in his throat. Charlotte descended stairs slowly, one small hand on the railing, gaze fixed on Victoria with intensity that seemed far too old for her years. When she reached the 2nd-floor landing where she could see everyone clearly, she stopped and spoke again. "I saw her, that day, the day Mommy died. I saw her put something in Mommy's tea." The words fell into the foyer like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. James felt like someone had punched him in the chest. "Charlotte," he breathed. "What are you saying? I was supposed to be at school." Charlotte continued, voice steady despite tears now streaming down her face. "But I forgot my library book, so my teacher asked Mrs. Patterson, she helps in the office, to drive me home to get it. We came in through the kitchen door, and I saw her." She pointed directly at Victoria. "She was in the kitchen. Mommy was upstairs resting because her head hurt. And this lady, she took out a small bottle from her purse and poured something into Mommy's teacup, the cup with pink roses that Mommy always used." Victoria's face had gone from white to red to white again. "That's ridiculous. A child's fantasy. James and I hadn't even met when Caroline died." "But you knew Daddy," Charlotte said quietly. "You were the lady from the company party, the one Mommy didn't like, the one she said was always looking at Daddy funny." James's mind raced backward through memories he'd packed away. The company holiday party, 21 months before Caroline died. There had been someone, a woman introduced as someone's +1, unusually attentive to him despite his wedding ring. Caroline had commented later, half joking about James's admirers. He'd dismissed it as nothing, but he couldn't remember her face, couldn't confirm or deny whether it had been Victoria. "You're delusional," Victoria snapped at Charlotte, but something desperate crept into her voice. James, she's making this up for attention. Children do that, especially when traumatized and looking for someone to blame. Mrs. Patterson saw too, Charlotte interrupted. She was behind me in the hallway. She saw you at the counter with the bottle. She told me not to say anything because she didn't know what she'd seen, and she was scared she'd get in trouble if she made accusations. But she saw. Derek's hand moved to Victoria's elbow, already calculating exit strategies. This wasn't in their plan. This wildcard testimony from a child who was supposed to be too scared to speak, corroborated by a witness they didn't know existed. James pulled out his phone, hands remarkably steady, considering the earthquake in his chest. Mrs. Patterson, where is she now? She still works at my school, Charlotte said softly. In the main office. She said if I ever needed to tell someone what we saw, I could. She said she was sorry for being scared. Everything crystallized, the entire conspiracy, the long game Victoria had been playing. She hadn't just swooped in after Caroline's death. She'd caused it. Then positioned herself perfectly to marry the grieving widower, have children who would inherit his fortune, and eliminate the first daughter standing in the way. James looked at Victoria with an expression that made her step backward. You killed my wife. You killed Caroline. And then you married me. Had children with me, all while planning to steal everything and destroy the daughter of the woman you murdered. You can't prove anything, Victoria said, but her voice shook. A child's testimony? A witness who was too scared to speak at the time? Speculation about a party? You have nothing that would stand up in court. Maybe not for a murder conviction, James agreed quietly. But I don't need a conviction. I just need doubt. I need to go to media with Charlotte's story, with Mrs. Patterson's corroboration, with questions about the timing of your appearance in my life. I need to show the world that you're not the victim. You're the perpetrator. And then your attempt to blackmail me with manufactured evidence suddenly looks exactly like what it is. A guilty person trying to deflect. He took 3 more steps downstairs, closing the distance. So here's what's actually happening. You're leaving this house in the next, he checked his watch, 23 minutes. You're signing whatever custody documents my lawyer presents. You're accepting whatever settlement I offer, which will be exactly what you're legally entitled to under our prenup and not 1 penny more. And in exchange, I won't have you arrested for Caroline's murder yet. You can't, I can, and I will. Because unlike you, I actually do have resources. I have investigators who can find Mrs. Patterson. I have forensic accountants who can examine every dollar you spent before Caroline died. I have technology experts who can recover deleted files, emails, text messages. And I have time, all the time in the world, to slowly, methodically build a case that will put you in prison for the rest of your life. James leaned closer, voice dropping to something cold and dangerous. But that takes time. Time during which you'd be free, potentially able to harm my children. So I'm giving you a choice. Leave now. Stay away from my family and maybe, you get to live the rest of your life in freedom, always looking over your shoulder. Or push this, and I promise you will spend decades in a cell wishing you'd taken the exit I offered. Victoria stared at him, calculations racing behind her eyes. Derek was already moving toward the door, professional survival instincts recognizing a lost cause. After a moment, Victoria grabbed her suitcase and followed, designer heels clicking on marble. At the door, she paused and looked back. The mask was completely gone, revealing something hollow and bitter. She ruined everything, you know, Charlotte. If she'd just adapted better, been more compliant, this could have worked. But she was always too much like Caroline. Always watching. Always remembering. Get out, James said. Victoria left. The door closed behind her with a definitive click that echoed through the foyer like a period at the end of a nightmare sentence. For several seconds, James just stood there, processing everything that had happened in the last 90 minutes. Then he looked up to where Charlotte remained on the landing, small and brave and traumatized in ways he was only beginning to understand. He climbed the stairs and gathered her into his arms. She clung to him, and this time when she cried, it sounded different. Not desperate, hopeless sobs from before. Something cleaner, something that might be the beginning of healing. Is it really over? She whispered against his shoulder. The worst part is, James promised. But sweetheart, we're going to need to talk to some people. Police, probably. Therapists, definitely. There's going to be a process. Will I have to go away? Never. You're staying right here with me. I promise. Maria appeared at the top of stairs with Madison and Mackenzie, one toddler on each hip. The twins reached for James, babbling happily, oblivious to the drama. James took them carefully, settling one in each arm while Charlotte pressed against his side. His 3 daughters. His family. Incomplete without Caroline, always and forever incomplete without her, but still his family. Still worth fighting for. Mr. Ashford? Maria's voice was gentle. Mr. Jenkins just pulled up, and there's something else. I have videos, on my phone, from the last 8 months, times when I saw things happening and I recorded them, in case someone ever needed proof. James looked at this woman who had protected his daughter in the ways she could, collecting evidence even when speaking directly felt too dangerous. Thank you, Maria, for everything. She nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. That little girl deserves so much better, you all do. We're going to do better, James said firmly. Starting right now, starting today. He carried his daughters downstairs to meet Robert Jenkins, to begin the legal process that would protect them from Victoria forever. As he settled into his home office, Charlotte curled in the leather chair beside his desk while twins played with blocks on carpet. James felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite happiness. Too much had been broken for that. Not even relief. The road ahead would be difficult and painful. But purpose, clarity. The absolute certainty that he would never again let anything, money, work, grief, or his own blindness, come between him and his children's well-being. The following morning arrived with harsh, bright sunlight that made previous days' events seem both more real and more surreal. James had spent the night in his room with Charlotte, neither willing to be separated. She'd finally fallen asleep around 3, exhausted by emotion and revelation, while he stayed awake watching her breathe, trying to process the magnitude of what had been uncovered. Robert Jenkins had worked until midnight, assembling emergency custody orders, restraining orders, and beginning paperwork that would legally separate Victoria from the Ashford family forever. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who'd handled James's business contracts for years, had shifted seamlessly into family law mode. This is going to be complicated, Robert had warned, briefcase open on James's desk, documents spread across the mahogany surface. Victoria won't go quietly. Women like her never do. Even if criminal allegations can't be immediately proven, the custody battle will be brutal. I don't care, James had replied, voice flat with exhaustion and determination. Whatever it takes. Whatever it costs. Now, as weak October sunlight filtered through bedroom windows, James sat on the bed's edge and watched Charlotte sleep. In rest, she looked even more fragile. Too thin, too pale, with dark circles under her eyes no 6-year-old should have. Her auburn hair tangled on the pillow, and even in sleep she clutched that worn stuffed rabbit. His phone vibrated. A text from Robert. Medical examiner agreed to review Caroline's autopsy. Contacted school. Verified Mrs. Patterson still employed there. She's willing to provide statement. Also, police want to interview Charlotte today if possible. Detective Reeves, Special Victims Unit. James typed back. This afternoon. Want to give her morning to rest, and I want child psychologist present during interview. Robert's response came immediately. Already arranged. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, pediatric trauma specialist. She'll be there. James set the phone down and rubbed his face with both hands. Special Victims Unit. His 6-year-old daughter was now officially a victim in a criminal investigation. The thought made him want to put his fist through something, preferably Victoria's carefully constructed world. A small sound made him look up. Charlotte's eyes were open, watching him with that too-old awareness that broke his heart every time. Morning, sweetheart, he said softly, reaching out to smooth her tangled hair. How are you feeling? Charlotte sat up slowly, small face scrunched in thought. Weird. Like I said something I wasn't supposed to say, but I was supposed to say it? Does that make sense? Perfect sense. James helped arrange pillows behind her back. You were incredibly brave yesterday. You told the truth even though it was scary. That's one of the hardest things a person can do. Is she really gone? She's not coming back? She's really gone. There are legal papers now that say she can't come near you or the twins. James paused, considering how much to explain. But Charlotte, some people are going to need to ask you questions about what you saw that day. Police officers and doctors. People who want to help make sure Victoria never hurts anyone again. Fear flickered across Charlotte's face. Will I get in trouble? For not saying something before? No, absolutely not. You were scared, and you were protecting yourself. That's what kids are supposed to do when adults make them feel unsafe. He pulled her close, feeling her small body relax slightly. But I'm here now. I'll be with you for every question, every conversation. You're not alone anymore. A gentle knock interrupted them. Maria entered with a tray. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, and homemade pancakes shaped like stars. I thought perhaps a special breakfast, Maria said, setting the tray on the bedside table. Her eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting she hadn't slept much either. For a very brave little girl. Charlotte's eyes widened at the star pancakes, the first genuine spark of pleasure James had seen from her in. He couldn't remember how long. You made these for me? Just for you. Maria's voice was thick with emotion. And I want to tell you something, Pequeña. I'm sorry, I should have spoken up sooner. I should have protected you better. You did protect me, Charlotte said quietly. You were nice to me when she wasn't looking. You made my lunch the way I like it. You told me stories about your daughters. She paused, then added with simple clarity of a child. You were the only person who was nice to me. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. James reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. Thank you, Maria, for everything you did, everything you are still doing. She nodded, unable to speak, and quietly left. James and Charlotte ate breakfast together in comfortable silence. James in the chair beside the bed, Charlotte curled under the duvet with the tray balanced on her lap. She ate slowly, methodically, and James noticed she kept glancing at him as if checking to make sure he was still there, still real, still planning to stay. Daddy? Charlotte asked after a while, setting down her fork. What's going to happen to Madison and Mackenzie? They're staying here, with us. They're your sisters. But they're her daughters too. Won't she want them? James considered his answer carefully. Victoria may legally be their biological mother, but being a mother is about more than biology. It's about loving your children, protecting them, putting their needs first. Victoria didn't do any of those things, so the courts will decide what's best for the twins, and I'm going to fight to make sure what's best is staying here with me and you. Charlotte absorbed this, small brow furrowed. I don't want them to go away, even though they're heavy and they cry a lot. I love them. Is that okay? It's more than okay. It's wonderful. James felt his throat tighten. After everything Victoria had put her through, Charlotte still had room in her heart for her half-sisters. We're going to be a family, sweetheart. A real one. Not perfect. We'll make mistakes and have hard days, but real. Where everyone is safe and loved and no one has to carry burdens they're too small to carry. The morning passed quietly. Charlotte played with her stuffed rabbit and watched cartoons while James worked on his laptop, fielding calls from Robert, from his company's board of directors, from the head of his security team. The story would need to be managed carefully. Victoria's accusations would leak eventually and the business ramifications could be significant. But for now, James's priority was simple: his daughter's well-being. At 1 in the afternoon, Detective Amanda Reeves arrived along with Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Reeves was a woman in her early 40s, with kind eyes and solid presence, suggesting she'd seen terrible things but hadn't let them harden her completely. Dr. Mitchell was younger, perhaps mid-30s, with warm brown skin and an easy smile that immediately put Charlotte at ease. They conducted the interview in the sunroom, James's suggestion, a space with natural light and comfortable furniture rather than sterile formality of an office. Charlotte sat on the couch with her rabbit. James on one side and Dr. Mitchell on the other, while Detective Reeves sat in a chair across from them with her notebook. "Charlotte," Dr. Mitchell began gently, "Detective Reeves needs to ask you some questions about what you saw that day with your mommy. But this isn't like school questions where there are right or wrong answers. We just want to know what you remember in your own words. And if you need a break at any time, or if something feels too hard to talk about, you just say so. Okay?" Charlotte nodded, small hands gripping the rabbit tighter. Detective Reeves leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell me about the day your mommy died? Start with the beginning of that day." And so Charlotte told her story, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence as she realized these adults were truly listening. She described the morning, sunny, a Tuesday, how her mother had woken with a headache and stayed home from the charity board meeting she'd planned to attend, how Charlotte had gone to school but forgotten her library book, the one about the girl with the magical garden. "Mrs. Patterson said we could go get it," Charlotte explained. "She helps in the school office. It was only 10 o'clock. We came back to the house and I was going to run upstairs to get the book from my room. But when we came in through the kitchen door, I saw her." "And what did you see?" Reeves asked quietly. The kitchen was empty except for her, the lady from the party. The one with the yellow hair who Mommy said looked at Daddy too much. She was at the counter and she had Mommy's teacup, the pink one with roses, and she had a little bottle, like the kind medicine comes in. She poured something from the bottle into the tea just a little bit and stirred it with a spoon. Then she put the bottle back in her purse and took the teacup toward the stairs. "Did she see you?" "No. Mrs. Patterson pulled me back into the hallway really fast. She put her finger to her lips and we hid behind the door until we heard the lady go upstairs." Charlotte looked down at her rabbit. Mrs. Patterson was shaking. She whispered that maybe the lady was giving Mommy medicine for her headache, but her voice sounded wrong. Like she didn't believe it but didn't know what else it could be. "What happened then?" "We left. Mrs. Patterson drove me back to school and she made me promise not to tell anyone what we saw, because she didn't know what it meant, and she was scared of getting in trouble for accusing someone." Tears were sliding down Charlotte's face now. "But then Daddy called that afternoon and said Mommy was in the hospital. And then she died. And I wondered if the lady." Dr. Mitchell gently rubbed Charlotte's back. "You did nothing wrong, Charlotte, nothing at all. You were a child, and the adults around you made decisions about what to do. But you're helping now. You're being so brave." The interview continued for another 20 minutes with Reeves carefully documenting every detail, the description of the bottle, the timeline, Charlotte's certainty that the woman she saw was the same woman who later became her stepmother. When it was finally over, Charlotte looked exhausted, drained by the effort of reliving trauma and fear. "We'll need to follow up with Mrs. Patterson," Reeves said to James after Charlotte had gone upstairs with Dr. Mitchell to rest. "And we'll want to re-examine the original autopsy report with fresh eyes. But I'll be honest with you, Mr. Ashford. This is going to be difficult. 3 years have passed, evidence degrades. And Victoria will have top-tier lawyers who'll tear apart every inconsistency. But there's a chance?" James pressed. "A chance she could be held accountable?" Reeves met his eyes steadily. "There's a chance. Especially if Mrs. Patterson's testimony corroborates Charlotte's story. And especially if we can find any additional evidence. Financial records showing Victoria knew your wife before she claimed to. Communication between Victoria and anyone who might have supplied whatever substance she used. Anything that establishes premeditation and opportunity. What about the medical examiner who filed the original report? Dr. Morrison?" Reeves's expression darkened. "We're looking into him as well. If there was a cover-up, if he accepted payment to falsify results, he'll face his own charges. But again, proving it 3 years later is challenging." James walked Reeves to the door, his mind already spinning through next steps, resources he could deploy, investigators he could hire. Money couldn't buy justice, but it could certainly pay for the thorough investigation that would uncover the truth. As Reeves's car pulled away, James's phone rang. Robert Jenkins, his voice tight with urgency. "James, we have a problem. Victoria's filed for emergency custody of the twins. She's claiming you're mentally unstable, that Charlotte's accusations are the result of coaching and manipulation, and that Madison and Mackenzie are in danger in your care. James closed his eyes, fighting back the surge of rage. Of course. Of course Victoria would counterattack. She wasn't the type to surrender quietly. When's the hearing? 3 days. Judge Patricia Harmon, Family Court. I've already started preparing our response, but James, Victoria's lawyer, is Marcus Chen. He's one of the best family law attorneys in the state, known for playing dirty. This is going to get ugly. Let it get ugly. I'm not letting her take my daughters, any of them. James looked back toward the house, toward the sunroom where Charlotte was probably still talking with Dr. Mitchell, toward the nursery where Madison and Mackenzie were napping under Maria's watchful care. What do you need from me? Everything. Financial records showing stability, character witnesses, documentation of Victoria's abuse toward Charlotte. And we need to be prepared for her to drag your late wife's death into this, to paint you as a potential murderer whose children aren't safe. She can try, but Robert, I want you to go on offense, not just defense. I want investigators digging into Victoria's past, where she came from, who she really is, what she did before she showed up at that company party almost 4 years ago. Because people don't just decide to murder someone and steal their life on a whim. This was planned, which means she has a history. Robert was quiet for a moment. That kind of investigation is expensive and time-consuming, and it might not yield anything useful in time for the custody hearing. I don't care about the cost. Start it anyway, because even if it doesn't help with custody, I want to know exactly who I married. I want to know what else she's capable of, and I want evidence that can put her away forever. They talked for another 10 minutes, strategizing and planning, before Robert disconnected to continue building their case. James stood in the foyer of his home, his and his daughter's home, and made another silent vow. Victoria had taken Caroline from him through murder and manipulation. She'd tormented his daughter through cruelty disguised as discipline. She'd invaded his family like a virus, burrowing in deep, planning to destroy from within. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated Charlotte. Underestimated a 6-year-old's ability to see truth and hold on to it even through fear. Underestimated the strength of a child who'd inherited her mother's quiet determination and her father's stubborn refusal to give up. And now, Victoria would learn what it meant to go to war with someone who had everything to lose and nothing left to fear. The battle was just beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and controlled chaos. James's home office became a war room, papers covering every surface as Robert Jenkins and his team assembled their defense. Character witnesses were contacted, business associates, neighbors, Caroline's friends who remembered the father James had been before grief consumed him. Medical records were subpoenaed. Security footage from the estate was reviewed and cataloged. Maria's phone videos, shakily filmed but devastatingly clear, were compiled into evidence files painting a picture of systematic abuse. Charlotte spent hours with Dr. Mitchell, working through trauma and preparing for the possibility she might need to speak to a judge. The therapist was gentle but thorough, helping Charlotte understand that telling her story wasn't betraying anyone. It was protecting herself and her sisters. "You're not the one who created this mess," Dr. Mitchell explained during one session, while James waited in the hallway outside her office. "You're just the one brave enough to shine a light on it, and that's hard. It's okay if it feels hard." "Will the judge believe me?" Charlotte asked, voice small. "I believe you. Your father believes you. Detective Reeves believes you. And I think the judge will too, because you're telling the truth. And the truth has a way of being recognizable, even when people try to hide it." James threw himself into work with the twins as well, realizing with painful clarity how little time he'd spent with Madison and Mackenzie since their birth. They were 9 months old now, at that fascinating stage where personalities emerged more clearly each day. Madison was bold and laughing, always reaching for new things, fearless in her exploration. Mackenzie was quieter, more observant, content to watch her twins' antics before attempting them herself. He fed them and changed them and played with them on the nursery floor, and with each interaction he fell more completely in love with these 2 small humans he'd barely known. Victoria had carried them, given birth to them, but she'd never been their mother in any meaningful way. They'd been props in her long game, pawns to be positioned. The realization made him hold them tighter, whisper promises against their soft baby hair that he would never let her near them again. On the evening before the custody hearing, James sat in the nursery rocking chair with both twins, one on each arm, while Charlotte sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, organizing a collection of stuffed animals by size. "Tell me about Mommy," Charlotte said suddenly, not looking up from her task. "The real stuff. Not the stuff people always say about dead people being perfect." James was quiet for a moment, gathering memories that still hurt to touch. "Your mother was funny. Really funny, in this dry, unexpected way that would catch you off guard. She could deliver the most cutting observation about someone with a completely straight face and then smile just a little, and you'd realize she was joking, mostly joking." Charlotte looked up, interested. "What else?" "She was terrible at cooking, just absolutely terrible. She once managed to burn water. I'm still not entirely sure how. But she loved trying new recipes anyway, convinced that this time would be different. I gained 10 pounds in our first year of marriage just from eating her experiments and pretending they were delicious." A small smile tugged at Charlotte's mouth. "Daddy." She was also incredibly smart, that's where you get it from. She could read people, understand what they needed even when they didn't know themselves. She worked with charities, helped raise money for children's hospitals and women's shelters, because she genuinely believed that people with resources had a responsibility to help those without. James paused, throat tight. "And she loved you so much, Charlotte. You were her whole world. Every plan she made, every decision she considered, it was always, what's best for Charlotte. She would have fought like hell to protect you if she'd had the chance." "I miss her," Charlotte whispered. "I miss her too, sweetheart. Every day." James looked down at the twins in his arms, at Madison's drowsy eyes and Mackenzie's serious little face. "But she'd be glad about your sisters. She always wanted you to have siblings. And she'd want me to protect all three of you, which is exactly what I'm going to do. What if the judge says we have to go with her? That's not going to happen." James spoke with absolute certainty, willing it to be true. "I promise you, Charlotte. Whatever I have to do, however I have to fight, you three are staying with me." Charlotte nodded, seemingly satisfied. She returned to organizing her stuffed animals while James continued rocking the twins, both now asleep, their small bodies warm and trusting against his chest. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You think you've won because you exposed some of my tactics, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. If I can't have the twins, I'll make sure you lose everything else. Watch yourself." James stared at the message, cold clarity settling in his gut. Victoria was unraveling, becoming reckless, which made her more dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. He screenshot the text and forwarded it to Robert with a single word: evidence. Robert's response came within seconds. "Forward to Reeves, too. This could be considered threatening. Strengthens our restraining order." James did so, then blocked the number. But the message lingered in his mind, a poisonous promise. Victoria wasn't done. This custody hearing was just round one in what would likely be a prolonged war. He needed to be prepared for anything. That night, James barely slept. He lay in his bed, the bed he'd once shared with Caroline, then with Victoria, now alone again, and planned strategies and contingencies. At 3 a.m., he got up and walked through his silent house, checking on each of his daughters. Charlotte curled around her rabbit, looking younger in sleep. The twins sharing a crib, their small bodies pressed close together for comfort. His family, his responsibility. In Caroline's memory, in honor of the wife he'd failed to save, he would not fail their children. Morning arrived with gray clouds and the promise of rain. James dressed in his most conservative suit, navy, white shirt, subtle tie. Looking the part of the stable, responsible parent would matter today. Robert picked him up at 8, both reviewing talking points and potential questions during the drive to the courthouse. "Victoria's lawyer will try to paint you as absent," Robert warned. "Too focused on work to properly care for 3 children. They'll emphasize the age difference between you and how demanding your company is. They'll suggest that Maria does more actual parenting than you do. And our counter? That you're making changes. that you've already reduced your travel schedule, promoted your VP to handle more day-to-day operations, and arranged for flexible work-from-home options. That you recognize you made mistakes after Caroline's death, but you're actively correcting them. And that Victoria's abuse toward Charlotte demonstrates she's fundamentally unfit, regardless of how absent you might have been. The courthouse was modern and imposing, all glass and steel and the weight of legal authority. They met Dr. Mitchell in the lobby. She'd been subpoenaed to testify about Charlotte's mental state and the credibility of her abuse allegations. Detective Reeves was there too, though she'd likely only be called if the hearing expanded beyond custody into the criminal investigation. Victoria arrived 15 minutes later with Marcus Chen, and James's first sight of her in 2 days was jarring. She'd transformed herself again, this time into the image of the perfect mother, minimal makeup, hair in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest dress and flat shoes. She looked young, vulnerable, nothing like the calculating woman who'd threatened him via text just hours earlier. The performance was masterful. James had to give her that much. Judge Patricia Harmon presided, a woman in her late 50s with gray hair, sharp eyes, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She reviewed the preliminary filings with quick efficiency before looking up at both parties. This is an emergency custody hearing regarding twin minors Madison and Mackenzie Ashford, currently 9 months old, she stated. Mrs. Ashford has petitioned for emergency custody based on allegations of unsafe environment and mental instability of the primary custodian. Mr. Ashford contests this and has filed counter-allegations of child abuse and unfitness. Let's begin with opening statements. Marcus Chen stood, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting authority and respectability. Your Honor, my client is a loving mother who's been forcibly separated from her infant daughters based on the word of a 6-year-old child who's been coached and manipulated. Mr. Ashford has demonstrated a pattern of putting his business interests above his family, has been absent for extended periods, and has allowed his minor daughter to make serious false accusations as part of what appears to be a vendetta against my client. The twins are at a critical developmental stage and need their mother, the parent who's been their primary caregiver since birth. Robert stood next, his opening more subdued, but no less effective. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Victoria Ashford systematically abused her 6-year-old stepdaughter, Charlotte, through physical and emotional torture. That she forced this child to carry her infant half-sisters while tied to bamboo poles as punishment and entertainment. That she did this while Mr. Ashford was traveling for work, deliberately concealing her behavior. That there is video evidence, witness testimony, and medical documentation of this abuse. And that far from being coached, Charlotte has been afraid to speak precisely because Mrs. Ashford cultivated that fear deliberately. This is not a case of an absent father. This is a case of a predatory stepmother who gained access to a family with the intent to harm. Judge Harmon nodded slowly. We'll hear testimony. Mrs. Ashford, you may present your case first. The next 3 hours were brutal. Chen called witnesses who painted James as a workaholic who barely knew his own children, business associates who confirmed his extensive travel schedule, Caroline's former friends who tactfully admitted that James had struggled after her death, had withdrawn into work. Maria was called and admitted that yes, she provided the majority of hands-on care for the children while Mr. Ashford was traveling. Victoria herself took the stand and delivered a performance that would have been award-worthy if it wasn't so deeply false. She spoke tearfully about how much she loved the twins, how she'd devoted every moment to their care, how she'd tried so hard to bond with Charlotte. But the child had rejected her from the beginning. She characterized the bamboo incident as a game that Charlotte had suggested, that had maybe gone too far, but wasn't the cruel punishment being described. Charlotte has always resented me, Victoria said, her voice breaking convincingly. I understood. I could never replace her mother, and I didn't try to. But she wanted her father's full attention, and she saw my daughters, her sisters, as competition. The accusations she's making are a child's desperate attempt to remove me from the family so she can have James to herself. It was masterfully done. James watched several people in the courtroom, court staff, observers, nodding slightly, their expressions sympathetic. Victoria looked like the victim. He looked like the negligent father. And Charlotte, not present for this hearing, was being painted as a troubled child acting out. Then it was their turn. Robert called Dr. Mitchell first. She testified about Charlotte's psychological state, the consistent patterns in her trauma responses, the behavioral markers that indicated genuine abuse rather than fabricated accusations. Children who are coached tell stories that are too perfect, Dr. Mitchell explained. Too consistent with the kind of language adults use rather than children. Charlotte's testimony had all the hallmarks of genuine memory. It was fragmentary. It included sensory details a child would notice, and she expressed appropriate guilt and confusion about not speaking up sooner. These are not the patterns we see in coached testimony. Maria was recalled and, with Robert's gentle questioning, provided devastating testimony about what she'd witnessed. Specific incidents, dates, times when Victoria's mask had slipped. She produced her phone and played 3 videos, shakily filmed from positions of concealment, showing Victoria forcing Charlotte to perform exhausting physical tasks, berating her for minor mistakes, laughing while the child struggled. The courtroom went very quiet during those videos. Judge Harmon's expression hardened. Even Chen looked uncomfortable, though he recovered quickly during cross-examination to suggest Maria might have doctored the footage or taken it out of context. Then Robert called James to the stand. For 45 minutes he walked through his version of events, his failure to see what was happening, his immediate action once he did see, the steps he was taking to restructure his life and priorities. He admitted his mistakes openly, without defensiveness. "I failed my daughter," he said, looking directly at Judge Harmon. "I was so buried in grief and work that I didn't see the abuse happening in my own home. That's on me. But the moment I saw the truth, the moment Charlotte found the courage to speak, I acted. I removed Victoria from our home. I contacted authorities. I restructured my company responsibilities so I can be present for my children. And I will spend the rest of my life making up for the months I let Charlotte down." Chen's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to break James's composure, suggesting his version of events was influenced by Charlotte's manipulation. But James held firm, his answers consistent and clear. The final piece of evidence Robert presented was the text message from the unknown number that had been traced back to a burner phone purchased by Victoria 2 days earlier. The threatening message was read aloud in court, its menace unmistakable. "Does this sound like a stable, loving mother?" Robert asked. "Or does this sound like someone who views children as possessions to be controlled and used as leverage?" Judge Harmon called a recess to review all evidence and testimony. For 90 minutes, James sat in a conference room with Robert, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. What if the judge decided both parents were unfit? What if child services got involved? What if his daughters were placed in foster care while the system sorted through the mess? When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Harmon's expression was unreadable. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony," she began. "This is a deeply troubling case involving serious allegations on both sides. However, the video evidence presented by Mr. Ashford, combined with Dr. Mitchell's expert testimony and the threatening communication from Mrs. Ashford, leads me to conclude that emergency custody should remain with the father." James felt his lungs expand, breath returning after what felt like hours of holding it. "However," Judge Harmon continued, "I'm appointing a guardian ad litem to conduct a thorough investigation of both households and all parties involved. I'm also ordering supervised visitation for Mrs. Ashford with the twins, 2 hours per week in a neutral location with a court-appointed supervisor present. And I'm ordering continued counseling for Charlotte with Dr. Mitchell, or an equivalent specialist." Victoria's face went white with rage, her careful mask cracking. "Your Honor, this is insane. I'm being punished for being a good mother while he—" "Mrs. Ashford." Judge Harmon's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "I suggest you stop talking. The evidence presented today shows, at minimum, poor judgment and concerning behavior toward a minor in your care. At maximum, it suggests deliberate abuse. Until the full investigation is complete, you should consider yourself fortunate to have any access to those children at all. We're adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. James walked out of that courthouse into gray afternoon drizzle, feeling like he'd aged 10 years in a single day. But he'd won. For now, he'd won. His daughters were safe, legally protected, staying home where they belonged. Robert clapped him on the shoulder. "This is good, James. Better than I expected, honestly. The guardian ad litem investigation will take weeks, maybe months. But with the evidence we have, I'm confident the custody will become permanent." "What about the criminal investigation? Caroline's death?" "That's separate. Detective Reeves is pursuing it, but it'll take time. The threat is that Victoria could be charged before the custody case concludes, which would actually help us. But it could also drag out for years." Robert paused. "Are you prepared for this to be a long fight?" James looked back at the courthouse, then up at the gray sky. Rain was falling more steadily now, cold and cleansing. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes. She came into my family with a plan to destroy us from the inside. Now I have a plan too. And mine ends with my daughter safe and Victoria in prison where she belongs." They drove back to the estate in comfortable silence. When James walked through his front door, he found Charlotte waiting in the foyer, her small face tight with anxiety. "Did we win?" she asked immediately. James knelt down and pulled her into his arms. "We won, sweetheart. You're safe. The twins are safe. We all stay together." Charlotte's body went limp with relief, and she clung to him with a desperation that spoke of how much fear she'd been carrying. "Forever?" "Forever," James promised. "I'm never letting you go again." The next few months fell into a new rhythm. James restructured his work schedule completely, delegating responsibilities he'd once insisted only he could handle. He discovered, somewhat to his surprise, that his company ran just fine without him micromanaging every decision. His VP, Jennifer, proved more than capable of handling day-to-day operations, and the board actually seemed relieved that James was finally trusting his executive team. He spent mornings with the twins, feeding, playing, reading board books in silly voices that made them giggle. Afternoons were for Charlotte, helping with homework, taking walks around the estate, having conversations that slowly, gradually, built back the trust he'd shattered through neglect. Evenings were for all three together, family dinners that were chaotic and messy, and absolutely perfect. Dr. Mitchell came twice a week for sessions with Charlotte, and James could see the difference. His daughter was laughing more, speaking more freely, carrying herself with less of that terrible tension that had defined her before. The nightmares were becoming less frequent. The flinching when he moved too quickly was fading. "She's resilient, Doctor," Mitchell told him after one session. "Children often are more than we give them credit for. But James, she's going to need continued support as she processes everything. The abuse from Victoria, yes, but also the loss of her mother. She never really had the space to grieve Caroline properly, because Victoria was there immediately, taking up all the oxygen in the room. How do I help her with that? You're already doing it, by being present, by listening, by not trying to replace Caroline or pretend the loss didn't happen. Grief doesn't have a timeline, and Charlotte needs to know it's okay to still be sad about her mother, even while she's building a new normal with you and her sisters." Maria continued as their household anchor, but James made a point of actually being the parent, rather than delegating everything to her. He learned to French braid Charlotte's hair by watching YouTube videos at 2 a.m. He figured out which baby food flavors the twins preferred, and which ones made them make hilarious, disgusted faces. He attended a parent-teacher conference at Charlotte's school, and was horrified to discover how many Victoria had skipped or attended alone, portraying herself as the overwhelmed stepmother dealing with a difficult child. "Charlotte is one of our brightest students," her teacher, Mrs. Anderson, told him, "but she's been so withdrawn this year. We were concerned, but Mrs. Ashford always had explanations. Charlotte was struggling with her mother's death. Charlotte was acting out for attention. Now, knowing what we know." She paused delicately. "We should have pushed harder. I'm sorry we didn't." "You didn't know," James said, though the words tasted bitter. How many people had seen signs and dismissed them because Victoria's performance was so convincing? The supervised visitation with Victoria was scheduled to begin 6 weeks after the hearing. James dreaded it, but the court order was clear. 2 hours every Saturday at a neutral facility with a supervisor present. The twins were too young to understand, but Charlotte's anxiety skyrocketed as the date approached. What if she tries to take them? Charlotte asked the night before the first visit. What if she hurts them like she hurt me? The supervisor will be there the entire time, James assured her. And it's in a public place. Victoria can't do anything without witnesses. But sweetheart, you don't have to go. The order is only for the twins. You're safe here. I want to go, Charlotte said firmly. I want to make sure she doesn't hurt them. James's heart broke a little at his 6-year-old daughter's determination to protect her sisters. Okay. But the moment you feel uncomfortable, we leave. Deal? Deal. The visitation center was a cheerful space designed to look less institutional. Soft furniture, toys, bright colors. The supervisor, a woman named Patricia with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, greeted them at the door and explained the rules. Victoria would arrive in 10 minutes. James and Charlotte could wait in an observation room with a one-way mirror, or they could leave and return when the visit was over. We're staying, James said immediately. When Victoria arrived exactly on time, and James was struck again by her transformation. She looked softer somehow, more vulnerable, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. Her hair was in a ponytail, her makeup minimal. She was playing the role of the heartbroken mother separated from her babies, and she was playing it well. The twins, of course, had no idea who she was. At 18 months old, 6 weeks was an eternity. They'd bonded with James and Maria, and this blonde stranger meant nothing to them. When Victoria reached for Madison, the baby pulled back and cried, reaching instead for Patricia. James watched Victoria's face cycle through emotions. Frustration, anger, calculation, before settling on manufactured hurt. They don't even know me, she said, her voice breaking. What has he been telling them about me? They're infants, Mrs. Ashford, Patricia said calmly. They don't have language comprehension yet. They simply don't recognize you after 6 weeks of separation. This is normal. Normal, Victoria repeated bitterly. She tried again with Mackenzie, who had a similar reaction. For the next 2 hours, James watched through the one-way mirror as Victoria attempted to engage with the twins, her frustration mounting as they showed no interest in connecting with her. They played with the toys Patricia offered. They responded to Patricia's gentle interactions. But Victoria might as well have been invisible. Charlotte watched too, her small hand gripping James's tightly. She's pretending to be sad, Charlotte observed quietly. But look at her eyes. She's angry. Charlotte was right. Victoria's performance was slipping, the mask cracking as the twins' rejection wounded her pride. This wasn't about missing her daughters. It was about losing control, losing possessions she'd counted as hers. When the 2 hours were up, Patricia brought the twins out to the waiting area. Madison immediately reached for James, babbling happily. Mackenzie smiled and kicked her legs, delighted to see familiar faces. Victoria stood in the doorway watching, and when she looked at Charlotte, the hatred in her eyes was so pure and undisguised that James instinctively moved to block his daughter from view. Next week, same time, Patricia said firmly, stepping between Victoria and James's family. Mrs. Ashford, you can go out the back exit. Mr. Ashford will leave through the front. James carried the twins to his car, Charlotte walking close beside him, and didn't relax until they were safely on the highway heading home. That was horrible, Charlotte said softly. Can't we make it stop? The judge ordered it, sweetheart. But Robert says if Victoria keeps showing no genuine bond with the twins, if these visits continue to be this unsuccessful, it'll support our case for terminating her parental rights entirely. How long will that take? Months probably, maybe longer. But we'll get through it together, okay? All of us. That night, after all 3 girls were asleep, James sat in his study and pulled out a folder Robert had delivered earlier that day. It contained the preliminary report from the private investigator James had hired to dig into Victoria's past. What he found was chilling. Victoria Ashford had been born Victoria Brennan in a small town in Nevada. She'd been married once before, at age 22, to a man named Michael Chen, no relation to her current lawyer. Michael Chen had died 3 years into their marriage, falling down the stairs in their home and breaking his neck. The death was ruled accidental. Victoria had inherited his life insurance policy, $500,000. She'd moved to California 6 months after Michael's death and changed her name to Victoria Sterling. Under that identity, she'd dated a wealthy real estate developer named Thomas Grant for 2 years. Thomas died of a heart attack at age 51, young for a fatal cardiac event but not unheard of. He'd named Victoria as a beneficiary in his will, leaving her $300,000. Victoria Sterling then disappeared, re-emerging a year later as Victoria Ashford after meeting James at that company party. But the investigator had found a gap, 9 months unaccounted for, during which Victoria had apparently traveled extensively through Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe. The investigator was still tracking that period, but preliminary findings suggested she might have been researching untraceable poisons and methods of inducing natural-looking deaths. 2 previous partners, both dead under circumstances that were ruled accidents or natural causes but could have been murder. And now Caroline, who died of a brain aneurysm that might have been chemically induced. James sat in the dark study, the folder open in his lap, and felt cold certainty settle over him. Victoria wasn't just a con artist or an opportunistic gold digger. She was a serial killer, systematically targeting wealthy men and the women who stood in her way, engineering deaths that looked natural, and moving on with her inheritance to the next victim. And he'd married her, brought her into his home, given her access to his daughter. The thought made him physically ill. He called Robert immediately, not caring that it was nearly midnight. "We need to expand the investigation. 2 previous partners, both dead. I'm sending you the file now. We need to contact authorities in Nevada and California, see if they'll reopen those cases. We need to build a pattern, show that Caroline wasn't an isolated incident." "James, slow down. What are you talking about?" James walked Robert through what the investigator had found, his voice steady despite the rage and horror churning in his gut. "She's done this before multiple times, and she'll do it again if we don't stop her. She's not just dangerous to my family. She's dangerous to anyone with money who's foolish enough to trust her." Robert was silent for a long moment. "This is explosive. If even half of this can be proven, Victoria's looking at multiple murder charges. But James, investigations into deaths that occurred years ago that were officially closed. It'll take time, years potentially, and there's no guarantee we can prove anything. I don't care how long it takes. I want her stopped, permanently, not just kept away from my daughters, actually held accountable for everything she's done." "Okay. I'll contact the DA's office first thing tomorrow. Loop Detective Reeves in on this. We'll need to coordinate across multiple jurisdictions, which complicates things. But yes, this needs to be pursued." After James hung up, he sat for a long time in the darkness, listening to the old house settle around him. Somewhere above him, his daughters slept peacefully, safe for now. But Victoria was still out there, still free, still plotting. The supervised visitations were opportunities for her to gather information, to look for weaknesses, to plan her next move. She'd threatened him via text that he had no idea what she was capable of. She'd been right. He hadn't known, not fully, but now he did. And he would use that knowledge to ensure she never hurt anyone again. 3 weeks later, the Guardian ad litem filed her preliminary report. James sat in Robert's office and listened as his lawyer read the key findings. "She's recommending that primary custody remain with you," Robert said, barely suppressing a smile. Her report documents the home environment as stable and nurturing, notes that all 3 children show strong attachment to you and Maria, and observes that Charlotte has made significant progress in therapy since Victoria's removal from the household. She also notes that Victoria's supervised visitations have been concerning, with the mother showing frustration at the twins' lack of recognition and making several inappropriate comments about Charlotte during transitions. What kind of inappropriate comments? Things like "Charlotte poisoned them against me, and that child has always been manipulative." Comments that suggest Victoria views Charlotte as an adversary rather than a vulnerable child. It's not a good look. Robert flipped to another page. The Guardian is recommending that custody be made permanent, that Victoria's visitation be reduced to once monthly instead of weekly, and that any future custody modifications require substantial evidence of changed circumstances and completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluation. James felt something in his chest unclench slightly. Not victory, it was too early for that, but progress. Solid, documentable progress. When does the judge rule? Final hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. Barring something unexpected, I think we're going to win this, James, decisively. And the criminal investigation? Robert's expression grew more serious. Detective Reeves has been working with authorities in Nevada and California. Michael Chen's death is being reviewed. They're exhuming the body to check for substances that wouldn't have been tested for originally. Thomas Grant's death is harder because he was cremated, but they're interviewing witnesses and pulling financial records. And the medical examiner has agreed to fully review Caroline's autopsy with fresh toxicology screening, using more advanced techniques than were available 3 years ago. How long? Months. Maybe a year or more for the out-of-state cases. But James, Reeves is building something solid. If even one of these deaths can be definitively proven as homicide, Victoria's looking at life in prison. And once charged with one, the others become much easier to prosecute. James nodded slowly. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you do exactly what you're doing. Be the father your daughters need. Document everything. Keep Charlotte in therapy. Maintain the structured routine. And trust the process, even when it feels impossibly slow. 6 weeks passed in a rhythm of careful routine and cautious hope. Charlotte's 7th birthday arrived in November, and James threw her the party Caroline would have wanted. Not the elaborate Instagram-perfect affairs Victoria had favored, but something real and joyful. A dozen of Charlotte's classmates came to the house, and they ran through the gardens playing elaborate games Charlotte had invented. There was a chocolate cake that James and Charlotte had baked together the night before, slightly lopsided but delicious. There were presents and laughter, and the kind of chaotic happiness that comes from children just being children. James watched his daughter blow out her candles and felt his throat tighten. This was what she'd been missing. This simple joy. This freedom to just be a kid. The twins started pulling up on furniture, cruising along the coffee table and laughing when they fell on their padded bottoms. Madison took her first independent steps on a gray Thursday morning, staggering 3 steps from the couch to James's waiting arms. Mackenzie followed 2 days later, more cautious but equally determined. James documented every milestone, every smile, every small victory, building a record of a childhood Victoria had no part in. The monthly supervised visitation continued, each one reinforcing what the guardian ad litem had observed. Victoria's inability to connect with children she'd supposedly loved, her mounting frustration at their indifference to her, her thinly veiled hostility toward Charlotte when she appeared at pickup times. 6 months after the initial discovery, Detective Reeves called with news that made James's hands shake. The toxicology results came back from Caroline's re-examined tissue samples, Reeves said without preamble. They found traces of thallium sulfate, a poison that causes symptoms that mimic a brain hemorrhage. It's hard to detect without specifically testing for it, which is why the original autopsy missed it. It wouldn't have been in the standard screening protocol 3 years ago. James sat down heavily. So it was murder. Definitively. Definitively. And there's more. Michael Chen's exhumation showed similar compounds. Different poison. He had high levels of a substance that causes blood clots and strokes. But the same pattern. Engineered to look like natural causes. We couldn't get anything definitive on Thomas Grant because of the cremation, but his doctors have reviewed his file, and now admit the heart attack was unusual for someone with no prior cardiac history and no major risk factors. What happens now? Now I arrest Victoria Ashford for the murder of Caroline Ashford. And once that charge is filed, Nevada will likely charge her for Michael Chen's death. The DA believes we can make both cases, though Caroline's will be easier because we have Charlotte's eyewitness testimony and Mrs. Chen's corroboration. When? I'm executing the warrant tomorrow morning. I wanted to give you advance warning because it's going to be media circus. Victoria is going to claim this is retaliation for the custody dispute, that you're using your money and influence to frame her. Her lawyers will fight hard. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Let it get ugly, James said quietly, as long as it ends with her in prison where she belongs. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. the following morning. James didn't witness it, but he watched the news coverage with grim satisfaction, Victoria being led out of the apartment she'd been renting in handcuffs, her face contorted with rage, screaming about injustice and conspiracies. No trace of the vulnerable victim she'd been playing, just raw, undisguised fury at being caught. The media descended on the story like vultures. Tech CEO's wife arrested for murder dominated headlines. Cable news ran endless speculation about black widows and gold diggers. True crime podcasts started covering the case before Victoria had even been arraigned. James's PR team went into overdrive, managing the narrative, ensuring that Charlotte's identity remained protected, that the focus stayed on Victoria's crimes rather than on James's family. Through it all, James kept his daughters' lives as normal as possible. Charlotte went to school. The twins had their routines. They celebrated the holidays quietly, just the four of them and Maria, with a real tree that Charlotte insisted on decorating and stockings that James had monogrammed with each girl's name. It was peaceful and warm, and nothing like the showy holiday celebrations Victoria had orchestrated in previous years. The final custody hearing happened 8 months after the initial confrontation, 2 months after Victoria's murder trial date was set. She appeared via video from jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit that was a far cry from her designer wardrobe. Marcus Chen had abandoned her as a client. Too much publicity, too much evidence, too much risk to his reputation. Her new public defender looked exhausted before the hearing even began. Judge Harmon reviewed the guardian ad litem's final report, which had only grown stronger over the months of observation. She reviewed the criminal charges filed against Victoria. She looked at the supervised visitation logs, showing a complete lack of mother-child bonding, and then she made her ruling. Based on the overwhelming evidence of abuse, the lack of any established bond with the minor children Madison and Mackenzie, and the serious criminal charges pending against Mrs. Ashford, I am terminating her parental rights in their entirety. Full custody of all 3 minors is awarded to James Ashford. All visitation rights are revoked, effective immediately. Victoria's face on the screen contorted with rage. She started screaming obscenities at the judge, at James, at the system, until guards removed her from the video call. James sat perfectly still, barely breathing as the reality sank in. It was over. The custody battle was over. His daughters were his, legally and permanently. Victoria had no rights, no claims, no leverage. She was out of their lives forever. He walked out of that courtroom into winter sunshine and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not just relief, not just satisfaction, but hope. Real, genuine hope that his family might actually be okay. The trial took place 14 months after that October day, when James came home early, and James attended every day, sitting in the gallery with Mrs. Chen, who had flown in from Taiwan to testify. Charlotte didn't attend. Dr. A. Mitchell and Robert agreed she was too young. That testifying on video deposition was traumatic enough, but her recorded testimony was played for the jury. Watching his 6-year-old daughter, now 7, describe seeing Victoria poison her mother, watching the jurors' faces as they listened to Charlotte's small, steady voice, James had to step outside twice to compose himself. But when he returned, Mrs. Chen was on the stand, corroborating everything Charlotte had said, her accented English clear and certain as she explained what she'd witnessed and why she'd been too frightened to report it at the time. I was immigrant, Mrs. Chen said simply. I had visa for work. I was scared if I accused wealthy white woman with no proof I would lose my job, lose my visa, have to leave country. I was coward. But this little girl, Charlotte, she gave me courage to finally tell truth. She was braver than me. The forensic toxicologist testified about the thallium sulfate, about how it worked, about how clever the poisoning had been. The financial investigators testified about Victoria's pattern, how she'd lived beyond her means before marrying, how she'd been deeply in debt, how each wealthy partner had provided not just a lifestyle but a financial rescue. The Nevada prosecutors testified about Michael Chen's death and the suspicious circumstances Victoria had left behind. Victoria's defense was weak. They tried to paint James as the vengeful ex-husband, tried to discredit Charlotte as a coached child, tried to suggest the thallium could have been environmental contamination. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury was out for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree for Caroline Ashford. Nevada would try her separately for Michael Chen's death, but this conviction meant Victoria would spend the rest of her life in prison without possibility of parole. When the verdict was read, James closed his eyes and said a silent prayer to Caroline. I got her for you. She'll never hurt anyone again. That evening, he gathered his 3 daughters in the living room. Charlotte was 7 now, growing tall and confident, her auburn hair in the French braid he'd finally mastered. Madison and Mackenzie were 2 years old now, running around the room and babbling in their own twin language. They had no memory of Victoria, no understanding of what she'd been or what she'd tried to do. For them, James was daddy, Maria was their beloved nanny, and Charlotte was their big sister who read them stories and taught them how to clap. I have something to tell you all, James said, gathering them close. Charlotte snuggled against his side, the twins crawling over his legs. The bad lady who hurt us. She's going to prison forever now. She can never hurt anyone again. We're safe. Completely safe. Charlotte looked up at him, her green eyes, Caroline's eyes, bright with unshed tears. Really? Forever? Forever. I promise. Does this mean Mommy got justice? James felt his chest constrict. Yes, sweetheart. Your mom got justice, and we're going to honor her by living the life she wanted for you, for all of you. A life full of love and laughter and safety. A life where nobody ever makes you carry burdens you're too small to carry. Charlotte buried her face in his shirt and cried, not the desperate, frightened sobs from before, but something cleaner. Grief, yes. Relief, definitely. But also release. The weight she'd been carrying for 3 years, the secret she'd held, the fear that had defined her. It was gone. Madison and Mackenzie, sensing their sister's emotion, crawled up and patted her head with their fat baby hands, making concerned noises. Charlotte laughed through her tears and gathered them close, kissing their soft curls. We're okay, she whispered to them. We're all going to be okay now. And watching his 3 daughters comfort each other, James knew it was true. The road had been long and brutal and marked by losses that could never be fully healed. But they'd survived. They'd fought. And they'd won. That night, after tucking all 3 girls into bed, James stood in the doorway of Charlotte's room and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, younger than she had in months. The nightmares were rare now. The tension was gone from her small shoulders. She was just a 7-year-old girl again, dreaming whatever 7-year-olds dream, safe in her home with her family. He thought of Carolyn, of the woman he'd loved and lost and failed to protect. He thought of the 3 years Victoria had stolen from them, the trauma she'd inflicted, the innocence she'd tried to destroy, and he made a final promise to his late wife. I'll do better. I'll be better. I'll be the father Charlotte needs, and the father the twins deserve. I'll never again let work or grief or anything else blind me to what's happening in my own home. I promise you, Caroline. They're safe now, and I'll make sure they stay that way. In the months and years that followed, James kept that promise. He scaled back his business involvement even further, eventually selling majority control of his company to focus on what mattered, his family. He and Charlotte talked about Caroline often, keeping her memory alive, sharing stories and looking at photos. He made sure Madison and Mackenzie knew about their big sister's mother, the woman who would have loved them too if she'd had the chance. Charlotte thrived, her natural brightness no longer dimmed by fear and abuse. She excelled in school, made genuine friends, learned that adults could be trusted and the world could be safe. She became the kind of big sister Madison and Mackenzie adored, patient and playful and protective without being overburdened. Dr. Mitchell eventually transitioned Charlotte to monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions, then to quarterly, then to annual. She's one of the most resilient kids I've ever worked with, Doctor, Mitchell told James at their final formal session. What happened to her was terrible, but she's processing it in healthy ways. She's going to be okay. And she was okay. They all were okay, not unmarked by what they'd survived. Trauma like that leaves scars that never fully fade. But okay. Safe. Loved. Together. The burden Charlotte had carried was finally lifted. And in its place was something Victoria could never have anticipated or destroyed. A family bound not by blood or legal obligation, but by choice and love, and the fierce determination to protect each other no matter what. Years later, when Charlotte was 16 and helping her 12-year-old sisters with their homework, when Madison was teaching Mackenzie a new soccer trick in the backyard, when James sat on the porch with Maria watching his daughters laugh together in the golden afternoon light, he thought back to that October day when he'd come home early and discovered the truth. The day everything had broken apart so it could be rebuilt correctly. The day his daughter had saved them all by being brave enough to speak. That burden she'd carried, carrying her sisters literally and metaphorically, carrying the secret of their mother's murder, carrying the weight of a household built on lies, she'd finally been allowed to set it down, and in doing so, she'd freed all of them. The house was full of light now, full of laughter, full of life. Caroline would have loved it, and somewhere James believed she was watching over them, proud of the man he'd become and the father he'd finally learned to be. The burden was lifted, the family was whole, and that was everything.